Hi guys, it's Heather, welcome back. I just wanted to do a quick walkthrough today of a deck that I've had for a while. I used in September as my September decks, and I've never really talked about, I've never really shown the cards. There's not a massive amount of videos out there from what I can see about this deck, so I thought it might be fun just to go through it with you and just show you the cards. This is an Italian deck. It's called the Fairy Tarots. The box does actually have an S on the end of tarots, which I always find very strange, but that's how it came on the box. But as I say, it's an Italian deck. It was created by someone called Antonio Lupatelli in 1997, and it's sold by Lo Scarabeo. I've probably had this deck for a long time. I don't even know. And when I first got this deck, I couldn't use it at all. And it sat in a drawer and it sat in a drawer and the box fell apart. So I don't have the box anymore. I actually made my own pouch to keep this one in as well. My own crochet pouch, where it sits in there quite nicely. And then this is a layout for some cards, because the box just completely died on me. Also, when it came, the cards were bigger. So it had the typical Lo Scarabeo where it had the white border with the different languages around it, which I really didn't like. After I used this in September, I decided to trim it and edge it with green and see what happens, because I thought, you know what, it's not a deck I'm going to use a huge amount. If it really does go horribly wrong, it can just go away in a drawer and we'll just pretend it didn't happen. So the cardstock is really good. It's really thick cardstock. It shuffles very well. It is, I mean, I don't know if you can see, but the cards are a bit dipped in the middle. Maybe one would be easier, I don't know. No, maybe not. But that's to do with the way that I shuffle. I mean, my cards get a really hard time when I shuffle them. The other thing I didn't know when I bought this deck, or I didn't really appreciate when I bought this deck, is that it is actually a pip deck. So although the minors do have images on them, the images actually have nothing to do with the card or the meaning of the card. Sorry, I'm just taking a sip of coffee. So I suppose you could, if you wanted to, read those images, but they're so far removed from the meaning of the deck that I don't think they're meant to be read that way. I don't think they were designed that way. I think they were designed just to give you something pretty on the deck rather than just looking at the images. But I suppose you could read them that way. Even though it was a pip deck, I actually really connected with it really well. And I found myself being able to really read it on my daily draws. And I did a new moon spread with it and a full moon spread with it, and I think I did another reading with it as well in September. I used it a lot in September and I really enjoyed working with it. It is a deck that can be read reversed, so the back is the same either way, and the pip cards are really easy to tell when they're reversed, as you'll see as I go through the deck. Some of the names of the cards were different, but I have taken those off, so obviously that doesn't matter so much, but it is really obvious, I believe, what each card is supposed to be. And I can't find a little white book for it, so I don't know if that means it didn't come with one or I've just lost it, but apparently you can buy a separate book to go with it. I just have never really looked at that. But I think at the moment for my Tarot on Earth that I'm doing with Tom Benjamin, I'm actually working through the CBD Tarot de Marseille. This is the deck that I'm using for that. But this is another pip deck that I will probably read in a very similar way moving forward as I'm reading the Tarot de Marseille, because that just seems to really work for me with those kind of decks. So there are some subtle differences. I mean, there are some differences. So this Fool, for example, is less about stepping out into the world and you know, less about that innocence and going on a journey and new beginnings, and more about mischief. And, you know, it's the middle of the night and he's banging a tambourine and the little dormouse is trying to stop him. He's much more about mischief and that childish behaviour than he is about the journey and the adventure that you get in a lot of other Fool cards, I think. I really like the owl there in the magician. And again, the magician doesn't have the 4 symbols necessarily of the elements, but he does. You know, he has the world as the pentagram. He has as earth. He has cups to represent water. He has the wand for fire, and I don't know. I think the square, maybe blue square, maybe is earth. Air. I don't know, but he kind of does, and he has a bird, which also could represent air, I suppose. So those things are in there. You just have to look a little bit more closely for them, I think. And this is something that I really want to, you know, go into in more detail at some point, is looking at the symbolism that you get in the Rider-Waite-Smith, or even the Marseille, maybe at some point, and looking at some decks and where they've taken them out and how that, sorry, not the camera, how that changes the meaning of that deck. And I find it fascinating that this Empress is not pregnant, and she's actually more, when you look at the Emperor, she looks more leadership-y and more in charge than he does. This is one of my all-time favourite Hierophant cards. As you know, as many do, I am not a fan. I don't like the Hierophant. I'm not keen. I don't love him at all. But I really, really adore this Hierophant. I just think he's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I love the cat, the key. I'm always so drawn to the keys on this Hierophant. They always really stand out to me. There's a very big dog barking outside. It's not mine. Mine does not bark like that. He's too small. Again, you see the Chariot. It's just this interesting, instead of having the black horse and the white horse, or the black Sphinx and the white Sphinx, or, you know, whatever those images are, instead they've got a whole retinue of flying creatures pulling his chariot, and it does have an effect on how you might read that card. Now I've put Justice back in position 8 here because that's how she came, and she was number 8 before I cut the borders off. And although I would normally put Strength in position 8, I wanted to stay true to how the cards came, especially for this walkthrough. So that's kind of what I've done there. And I like this Justice, actually. I think a lot of the symbolism of Justice has remained in this card. The Hermit again. Very, very cute. I think this was called the Oread rather than the Wheel of Fortune, this card, before I cut it off. But again, this is one of my absolute favourite wheels. I love this. And I think I've talked about this before when I did a very brief talk about these cards, when I was talking about the fact that they were the cards I was going to use for September. And I personally am not keen on this Strength card. I prefer my Strength card to be about internal strength and about the strength that comes via self-confidence and that feeling of self-worth and that feeling of inner control. And this card is a very outer expression of strength, and that's not really what I look for on my Strength cards. So I do like the card, but it's not how I like to see strength depicted in my decks. It's just a personal thing. This Hangman does not look happy to be there at all, does he? He doesn't look like this was a choice that he made, like a sacrifice that he made. And he broke his blade, look, and all his money's fallen out. And he's got a little snake, It's a very interesting take on this card. Again, if you sit and really study the imagery in this card, the meaning completely changes from what you normally get in the Hanged Man card. I'm not going to go on and on about every card because we will literally be here all day. There is something I could say about every one of these, but again, this one I think had a different name. This one was called the Sylph or something. I don't know how to say that word, but I like that. And this might have been the troll rather than the devil, I think. The tower only has one person falling out of it, which is interesting because often in the tower you get two, but this one only has one. And it has, oh crap, sorry, a little symbol here, which I don't know what that is. I'm going to hold it up and try not to knock the camera. If anybody can tell me, it looks like a combination of symbols to me, but I don't know my symbols very well. So if anybody can fill me in with what that symbol actually is, it would be very much appreciated. I like how the star's outfit and everything kind of blends her into the sky. The sun, I like this take on the sun. No children, no horses. Oh, no, this is the moon. Yeah, shut up. But the sun, again, still no children, no horses. We'll get there. The moon. Actually, they're very similar, the sun and the moon. I think that's what's confused me. And it was the crab that made me realise it was the moon. But I miss the dog. I miss the dog and the wolf in the moon card. I like them in my moon cards. But yes, total blonde moment there. Moving on. But yes, the sun, no babies, no horses. Very much about celebration and joy, and you can really see that coming from that card. I'm just going to move past those very quickly because I feel a bit silly. And then again, the world is a really interesting take on this card. You've got what appears to be a globe and a fairy pushing it off the hillside. So some of the minors are very close to what you would expect. And some just seem to be different enough that they almost completely change the feel of that card for me. Anyway, and then we get into the minors, and the minors have different suits. So we have the acorns, which are the wands. You then have the, I don't know what order these are in actually, but you have leaves, which are swords. Hearts are cups, and then bells are pentacles. And each one has an animal on the ace card, a cute little animal. And then the artwork from 2 to 10 and the style of the cards from 2 to 10, I think, seems completely different, like a completely different style to the majors and also the ace and the court cards, which are very similar to the major style. It's just the 2 to 10s in the middle have this completely different feel to them, and I guess completely different style of art to them. And I'm not still 100% sure how I feel about that, because it almost feels like two different decks. But I don't dislike it, and I do still read with it, so make of that what you will, if you like. I'm sorry, I have to keep stopping to drink a lot today. My throat is really dry this morning, so I apologise for the constant slurping sounds you might be able to hear. I don't know what this means. I could probably look it up, or someone could tell me, but I don't know what that means. I think they all have Latin on, and I don't know what they mean. So as you can see, you've got an image, and you see what I mean about this style just being very, very different. These are a lot, I don't know, I can't think of the word, and I'm not really an arty person. Like, I don't really understand art history or different styles of art enough to be able to say much about it, but it just feels different to me. But they don't really have anything to do with what you would normally expect. So it is more or less a pip card. And each of the pips on each of the suits are laid out the same. So it soon becomes easy to figure out what number you're on, especially when you get up to the higher numbers without actually having to count them, because you start to recognise the pattern. Now, I was originally going to use this deck for tarot, to work through Tarot Unearthed. I didn't own the CBD Tarot de Marseille. No, I think I did. I think I just bought it actually, because I think I bought a Marseille deck before I bought Tarot Unearthed. But I had this deck, and I had the Tarot del Fuego deck as well, which is also a Marseille inspired deck. Now, the Tarot del Fuego I knew I wasn't going to use because it's Marseille inspired and they are pip decks technically, but they do have a lot going on in the pips, even though they're pips, if that makes sense. So I didn't want to work with those because they were too busy for starting out, I think, for working for what I wanted to achieve. And then I thought about working with this deck, but I decided to go with the CBD Tarot de Marseille because it's got nothing but pips. And I think, even though, like, this guy looking at this beetle has nothing to do with the 10 of Wands and what you would normally, like, if you can get the imagery or the meaning for the 10 of Wands out of that image, fair play to you. I think they have nothing to do with each other, and I think it would have been distracting. I think the images would have been more distracting than they would have been useful. So I decided not to use them. All of the knights are still riding on an animal of some kind. None of them are on horses, but they are all still on an animal of some kind. And the animal doesn't seem to have any connection to the animal that's in the ace, in case you were wondering. What I find interesting about this deck is that the women all seem very young and very, you know, straight-backed and very powerful, like with the Emperor and the Empress. And the men always seem a little bit older and a little bit more, I don't know, hunched and less regal than the queens. The kings, particularly, just seem so much less regal than the queens do. I find that interesting. If anybody knows Latin and they know what these words mean and they want to share, please do. But I will probably end up looking it up anyway at some point. So as I said, the leaves are swords. So the Three of Swords, you can kind of get that heartbreak, you know, thing from this deck, but and the Four of Swords, you can get the Four of Swords, like the image in the Four of Swords makes me think more of Pentacles, because he's like holding on and refusing to share, and it feels like more of a pentacly image. So yeah, basically I think you kind of have to ignore the images a little bit. And in some, they're probably closer to the meaning of the cards than others. But in general, I found that they didn't really help at all. So this is an interesting one for me because I love foxes, as you know, and I'm really happy that there's a fox in this deck. I'm just not sure I would have had the Knight of Swords riding a fox. I think the Knight of Acorns, for me, would be riding a fox, would make more sense. But I don't know how much the animal picked, it was in any way connected to the actual suit. I don't know. Now, she does not look like I would expect the Queen of Swords to look like. When you have the, sorry, one more drink. The Empress, who's really strong and powerful looking, and then you have the Queen of Wands, who again has that massive sword and you know, looks Queen of one, and looks really strong and powerful almost. And then the Queen of Swords looks very matronly, which again, fascinating choices. And with the King of Swords, I would expect the swords to be the most severe looking, and yet they're absolutely not. I love this little lamb with the little, oh, it's just so cute. Sorry. Try and get through these a little bit quicker. I don't really seem to have much to say about the hearts. They're just, you know. I have to say though, I know I've said this, I think I've said it already, but I was pleasantly surprised when I worked with this deck in September. I honestly thought I would struggle. I thought I would, because it was pips, that I would really, really have to work hard to get any meaning out of them. And I think actually working with this deck, I found it very easy. I found it very, very easy. Yeah, no, I did. I just, you know, I turned over the card. Sometimes I had to be like, how many bells is that again? But I was very quickly able to connect what I knew about that particular card with the card and read them. And I think this was, when I worked with this deck in September, this was the first time that I really felt like, yeah, I've got this. I've got this. I can do this. You know, I'm not an expert. I'm not a master tarot reader. I'm not top of my craft or whatever. I still have so much to learn. I still would very much put myself in the beginner category, although probably further along beginner than beginner. I don't, you know, like not intermediary, but not complete beginner either. I don't know how, if there's a word for that, I don't know. But I suddenly felt for the first time that I could do this. I could actually do it, that I was learning something. It was going in, I was making these connections, and that I could be proud of what I was doing and what I had learned over the last, 18 months, I think it had been. And I did at one point wonder about getting rid of this deck because I had it for such a long time and I thought, am I ever going to use it? Am I ever going to read it? And now I'm really, really glad that I didn't, because honestly, I really, really enjoyed working with it. It's one that I will definitely use again. And once I finished my Tarot on Earth studies, I think, and I've worked a bit with the Tarot de Marseille, I think I'm going to then try and use this one a bit more as a kind of Marseille-inspired pip type deck, because I do find that I'm reading it differently than I would read RWS. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that you got a good look at the cards. Do you use this deck? Do you have this deck? Do you now want this deck? What do you think about the imagery on the pips? Do you think that you could read with it, or do you think that it, like me, it's something that you almost have to completely ignore that it's there and, you know, tell yourself that it's been done purely for aesthetic reasons and not pay any attention to it? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all soon. I have a couple of videos planned to make over this weekend, so hopefully I'll get some more up soon. Whatever you are doing, have a wonderful time. Take care and lots of love. Bye bye.